Let's broaden our analysis and bring in Negah Angha, who is a former National Security Advisor under US President Joe Biden. She's also a graduate teaching fellow at King's College London, where she's a PhD candidate in the Department of War Studies. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm wondering how you are feeling about the situation right now as it is. We obviously have the extension of the ceasefire, which doesn't mean that hostilities cease, because we're seeing things in the Strait of Hormuz that will bring alarm to anybody's minds. And also, we're wondering about what happens next in terms of talks, because we were expecting a second round to take place. That didn't happen at all. Now we're talking about the end of this week. There are so many balls up in the air here. And of course, if one of them drops, there will be people then caught in the crossfire if things develop again. What is your sense of the situation?
Yeah, well, good evening. Thanks for having me on. I think we're at a strategic impasse right now. Both sides have dug in their heels. Both sides believe they have the upper hand. You know, the U.S. can escalate. It's not necessarily very clear what would be achieved beyond further destabilization of the global economy. At the same time, the blockade has, tightened pressure to a point where it's become a bit more politically difficult for Iran to engage in the negotiations. Iran has made very clear they're not seeking any ultimatums. They don't want to negotiate under a blockade because it'll signal weakness domestically, not necessarily strength. So Washington right now is kind of left with two very difficult options. It's either has to ease pressure to enable some form of diplomacy, or escalate in ways that are unlikely to force capitulation, but may actually increase, global stability. The one thing Iran has going for it is time, and I think they understand that the U.S. Wants to, in some ways wrap up this Iran conflict for right now. So we'll have to see what happens over the next couple of days.
Do you feel that the different approaches of the US and Iran to this situation puts Iran in a stronger position? Donald Trump, the Trump administration looking at it in a transactional way, Iran looking at this perhaps in a more ideological way?
Look, I think right now, I think both of them, but both parties at this point are being quite transactional. Again, I think Iran is looking at the Strait of Hormuz as a leverage point, as a stick, but also looking at it in terms of long term and ways in which it can find the economic relief it was trying to seek. But, I think the most plausible situation right now is, potentially a very narrow political framework, a discussion that the mediators, both Pakistan, but also allies around who are speaking to the United States and Iran, trying to find some way to really move this away from a symbolic de-escalation to real de-escalation. And that political framework will not be this comprehensive agreement, but it'll be some form of discussion on an enrichment cap, a plan, a future plan for dealing with the highly enriched uranium, potentially economic relief. But the issue is there's a lot of hard questions that are left that will remain unresolved, I think, for quite some time, and that could be the most glimmer of hope that we could find, hopefully, in the coming days or weeks.
We've heard in days past J.D. Vance, Vice President of the U.S., declaring the desire to bring Iran into the commercial world, to open up the riches of the country and to create wealth for everybody. One can hear those words and wonder whether he knows exactly how that would reason out and how it could actually happen. I'm wondering sort of how that kind of vocabulary will play in Tehran with the leaders in the Iranian government.
I think there's quite a bit of messaging that's being volleyed back and forth by both sides. I think a lot of the messaging that Vice President Vance is sort of putting out is with the hopes and the intent of it reaching the Iranian people inside the country and the Iranian diaspora. Unfortunately, the people inside Iran continue to be in this internet blackout, and so the information that could filter into them is to a limited population. But I think again, it's being able to provide some sort of hope to again the Iranian people inside the country and the diaspora, that there could be light at the end of the tunnel once this regime potentially could capitulate.
I'm hearing your voice, Negah, that you don't see that light at the end of the tunnel. I'm hearing a little bit of pessimism coming from you there. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the sticking points remain the same, don't they? Uranium enrichment, Iran's support for the proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and of course what's happening on the Strait of Hormuz. And when we see two vessels being seized by the Iranians, one being fired on as well, it doesn't augur well, does it?
Again, I think right now both sides are testing each other. I think that's part of sort of when we think about the strategic impasse that we are in. There is an element of testing each other. There's an element to be able to say to the other party that the stick that they have in their hand is much greater, much more enforceable. And Iran has been articulating to not only the United States, but also Western allies, the impact and the control that they have over the global economy right now with sort of the where we are with the Strait of Hormuz. And so there is this sort of attempt for a lack of a better term, flexing. And that is essentially what Iran is trying to do, again, because I think they want to show ahead of time the cards that they have and wanting to show that they have the upper hand. I'm not necessarily suggesting that they do, but that is their attempt of projecting.
But still, fundamentally, there is so much distrust between both sides. It's hard to imagine how this goes beyond where we are now.
The gulf is quite wide. You're absolutely right. And I think this is why I think there's a very narrow window, a very narrow path that the mediators will be able to focus on. And I think that will truly be potentially a political framework, right? A sort of an agreement that we are going to pause a discussion of what could be done with the enrichment cap, what could be done potentially in the future with the nuclear file. The Iranian regime will want some sort of economic relief, and truly push the harder questions later down the road. So it'll be an agreement to meet at a future time to talk about the nuclear file or some of the more technical issues at a later time. That could be a possible window. It'll allow for diplomacy to work to a bit, and it'll allow both sides to ease off a little bit on some of these pressure points for diplomacy to work.
Negah Angha, thank you very much for joining us. As always, we appreciate your time and most of all your analysis that you bring to what is a complex issue. And we know, of course, that many people behind that are wanting the right resolution of what is going on, but at present, it seems we're not making any progress. Negah Angha, former National Security Advisor to US President Joe Biden and teaching fellow at King's College in London, PhD candidate at the Department of War Studies, among other things, a wide and varied career. And we appreciate your knowledge here at France 24. Thank you once again, Negah Angha, for joining us.
Thank you again. Appreciate it.